On today's show, I want to welcome a friend. Thankfully, I can call him a friend, and someone who I've looked up to for a long time. Almost, it's crazy to think, like 5 years now that we've known each other. I would love to introduce AJ Vaynerchuk. AJ, if you can, just introduce yourself, tell people about your hometown, college, where you're from, and then what you're currently up to. That would be great.
Sure. You got it. Well, Jordan, thanks for having me on. It has been 5 years, which is pretty awesome.
Jump shot still there.
I grew up in, I don't know, not for me, maybe for you. I haven't shot a basketball for real since like March.
It's been a year.
I miss basketball a lot. Yeah.
Me too.
I grew up in Jersey, central Jersey, kind of in the middle of nowhere type town, really quiet, but I loved it. Grew up there. I went to school in Boston. I went to Boston University. Was up there for a few years. Actually met my wife, Allie, there, which is the best part of my college experience. So we met there. I then really spent the entire senior year there focused more on what I was going to do next than kind of the task at hand. And so my brother and I played around with a lot of different ideas. My brother Gary is 11 years older. And we landed on the idea of starting a advertising agency, predominantly focused on social media initially back in 2009. So I graduated college the very next morning. I walked the stage, got my diploma, hopped in the car, and we drove to New York, my family. And so next morning we were fully up and running, hired a few buddies from high school and college to kind of help get us started, and did that. Lived in the city for like 5 or 6 years. And then my wife and I wanted to get going on a family, moved out to Westchester, New York, which is where I'm now. Started said family, have really built that family. We, if I look a little bit tired, it's because my wife just gave birth to our third child, like 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
We got 3 kids. Thank you. We got 3 kids under 3.5. So that's been a zoo at home, but it's been the best. And, I helped run VaynerMedia, what is now VaynerX, for the first 7 years of my career, and then took a little bit of time off and then dove into the world of athlete representation and have been running Vayner Sports ever since. Vayner Sports is a full-service sports agency. Mm-hmm. We do everything but the financial services, so we don't do any financial advising or banking or anything like that, but we do the contract work for the athlete with their team or their league, and then, off the field or outside the octagon, in terms of endorsements and brand building and PR and things of that nature. And so by doing that, we represent football players, baseball players, MMA fighters, and gamers, and combat sports in general. We also have a WWE superstar as a client as well. So that's what I'm up to now.
And I've been watching that since day one, and it's just, as you guys grow and build, it's something to watch. I admire, because it's, you've shown that you have to put in the hard work and the time. It doesn't just come to you. And I must say, it's the most Vaynerchuk thing to graduate, jump in a car, and the next day start building a business, right? That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
It's time to celebrate.
I kind of skipped the detail. Gary and I landed on the idea of VaynerMedia in late March, early April. Mm-hmm. And I graduated in mid-May. So there's, probably like a 6 to 8 week period in terms of, we decided this is what we're going to do, and my graduating be able to kind of get going full time. But Gary, took the approach of like, hey, I'm going to start talking to my network. I'm going to start selling our services and selling the idea of what we do now, so that, we could have clients in place for when you graduate. And he actually landed a project in early April. And so we had our first client in early April, and I still had like 6 weeks of school left. So I was kind of doing this double duty of launching VaynerMedia while still, wrapping up finals and things like that. And so we were actually up and running even before then.
When you say that you were up and running, what were you guys necessarily doing? You built out the VaynerMedia LLC. What, like, were you utilizing tools? Were you kind of just working out of Google documents? I don't even know if Google Docs were really a thing back then.
Yeah, they were.
Was it more like a Microsoft Word doc? Like, how were you guys kind of getting up and running?
Don't date me too much. I'm only 33. So yeah, we went ahead and formalized the business in April of 2009. So we got a lawyer to incorporate the business. When I say up and running, we actually had a project. So, and as you're familiar with, the core of our business was a retainer model.
Yeah.
But at that point, we hadn't really established what the core of our business was. And so Gary had a friend, shout out to a guy named Brian Martin. I haven't caught up with Brian in a long time, but Brian was a good dude. And Brian had an agency. It's actually the first and only piece of business that we took as from an agency. We really weren't about that. But,
Right.
Gary and Brian had a good relationship that obviously predated our business. He had a project where he needed a brand Facebook page and Facebook tab. So we built an interactive Facebook tab for a Fortune 500 brand for Brian's agency as like a subcontractor, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, we didn't have anybody. So I hired, a freelance. The good thing is we had a network. Gary and I knew a lot of developers and designers. We had kind of immersed ourselves into the Web 2.0 culture, Silicon Valley culture. So we had people we knew that could help us. But yeah, I hired a developer, a front-end designer, and a graphic designer to build out this tab. And I guess my role was kind of project manager / client liaison, where I was interacting. I was interacting with both the brand client, Brian Martin's team, and then the 3 freelancers that we hired to build out this tab.
It's incredible. As someone who started his own company as well, I mean, to have, first of all, that network while you're still in college and still grinding and working. I mean, senior year of college, I was too busy partying and enjoying myself. And
I was really lucky. I had a brother who's 11 years older than me.
Right.
Who, a lot of that comes with a ton of good fortune. Older brother was 11 years older than me, who's already successful in business, that opened a lot of those doors for me. I did an internship out in San Francisco my junior year of college in Silicon Valley. Well, not Silicon Valley. I did it in San Francisco, but that general area where a lot of tech innovation was happening. And what I actually did, I was in San Francisco for 2 months in between junior and senior college, and I couch surfed, where I did not go out and get a place for myself.
Right.
And when I say couch surf, I couch surf with people that I knew. I built up. Gary and I first went to South by Southwest Interactive, I think, in 2007. So, went to a bunch of different events. I went to London for a tech conference to feature web apps.
As a sophomore in college.
As a sophomore in college, yeah. And again, good fortune, right? I did not have any college debt. My parents paid for my college. Yep. I had an older brother that was kind of blazing the trail for me and opening up a lot of doors. And so, having a good foundation, having a lot of luck on my side, I took advantage of that luck and networked. And yeah, so when I was out in San Francisco for 2 months, I stayed in maybe 5 or 6 different places and just slept on couches or spare bedrooms and did my internship and, went out on the weekends and met a bunch of people. And these are all people that were, neck deep in the world of tech and startup.
Yeah, so I want to get into that because your work ethic, your brother's work ethic, it all comes from somewhere, right? I have the same thing, and this is something that we always touch on, and why I think we're so close is the importance of family and the role it plays in our lives. And I've been blessed and lucky enough to meet your parents. Your mom is the sweetest lady, and your dad is exactly what I expected. Just a hard worker, immigrant that, that reminds me of my family and all the people that I know. So if you could, can you just touch a little bit on what your parents did for you and your upbringing, and as well as your dad's work ethic and how that has put a lasting imprint, on you and for the rest of your career and, the generations to come?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at my own perspective on how people are shaped, and obviously I think a lot about this considering I have 3 little kids now, it's a combination of nature and nurture, right? Mm-hmm. So from a nature perspective, I definitely think I have qualities from each of my parents. I think that my father is a man of principle. He's a man of work ethic. He's somebody that, a handshake is better than a contract. He's somebody that has been through a lot of adversity, lost his father at a young age, took his family, his wife and his, my brother, who was 3 at the time, from the former Soviet Union to immigrate to America with pit stops in Italy and other places along the way. So that's my father. And then my mom is actually also somebody that had a lot of tragedy, lost her mother at a young age, lost her father fairly young as well. I mean, my mom lost both of her parents. I want to say my mom was 6 when she lost her mother and was in her early 20s when she lost her father. So, suffered a lot of loss and adversity, also brought her son and along with my father from Russia to America. They both had to learn a language. They had to make a life for themselves. And then also my mom is somebody who's just the most loving mother of all time. Somebody who is all about her children, is selfless, My father's very selfless as well. So yeah, that's the nature part that I inherited. And then from a nurture perspective, I'll hone in on what you talked about initially. Like my dad set the tone for work ethic. My dad comes to America, works all these different jobs, is working 18, 20-hour days. He's, driving taxis, working stock boy at a liquor store, construction, like just making it happen kind of thing. And a lot of it's manual labor, and it's a lot of it hard, retail, especially for,
Right.
I know my father for his work with his retail business, the wine library, right? That's what I remember. And I came later, I came like 7, 8 years after they came to America. So I was born here when we were already pretty well established in America.
Right.
And so I know my father as a small business owner, and in retail, that's hard fucking work. And so, that definitely set the tone. And then my brother everybody in my family has an incredible work ethic. My sister, my brother, my mom. So work ethic, I think you mentioned the immigrant mentality, coming from nothing, no language, no money. I think work ethic was kind of a requirement. There was no other option. And so it was certainly drilled into me at a very young age and stayed with me.
That's awesome, man. And, one thing that there aren't many people who I speak to about this and that I can speak to about it, but there are so many advantages. And I think about this. I talk to Allie, my wife, all the time about it, is being the baby in the family, right? I grew up, I was picked on by all my older cousins, my brother. I was the little shit in the family, right? And all those years of bullying and pushing me down, it made me stronger. But at the same time, there are so many advantages of being the baby in the family, in the sense of you get to see what everyone else does and their decisions that they make. And from those decisions, you get to take little pieces and make it into your own and try not to make the same mistakes that others have. So can you tell me a couple of situations where you feel like being the baby in the family has helped you kind of persevere?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think there's definitely an advantage to being the baby, in the sense that, you only if you're lucky enough, like I was, have older siblings that are good examples that set the tone, right? If your older siblings, set you up for disaster, then it was a disadvantage to be a younger sibling, right? But I think advantages, I mean, shoot, it feels endless. I'll say one for sure is that I think I got very lucky because I got the more Americanized and softer version of my parents. I just think that my brother and his sister are fairly close in age, so 3.5 years apart. Mm-hmm. So they had relatively similar experiences. Relatively, there was still, my brother being male, and I think, growing up in the 80s and early 90s had a little bit more of the traditional, like, you're a man, you're firstborn, immigrant family, you need to go to work and work really hard. Whereas my sister, I think, was a little bit more coddled as like the princess of the family, so to speak, in that regard. So she had a little bit of a advantage in that regard, but they still grew up under a very Russian household, very strict. My parents were going through a lot of things for the first time with them. Right. By the time I came around, they had already been there, done that. And I even see that now with like my daughter, Eloise, the third. I've already been there, done that in terms of the newborn stage with my son and my daughter. So I'm a better father now than I could have been, I think, for my first daughter. And so I think that was a big advantage. And then I think just honestly, I'll summarize it as one whole thing wrapped up in a bow tie. It's just like both my brother and my sister were such good role models that it's 1,000 things, and I couldn't describe them all, but just how they handle themselves, even personally and professionally, things that they did personally, whether it's like dating or friends that they had made or mistakes that they had made. Like you said, I think the biggest advantage is that you get to observe it all, keep what you like, and drop what you think doesn't work for you personally.
No, absolutely. I go through this all the time. I mean, looking for a house now with my wife, like where do we want to move? How many kids do we want to have, right? There are so many things that we can continue to look at and evaluate and observe from afar. And then, like you're saying, just take those things and make your most educated and decision. To move a little away from family, I want to kind of step back to work and your work experience because, I mean, it's incredible what you've done over these years. I do want to touch on investments, but right now I want to just kind of go back and talk about VaynerMedia and VaynerSports. especially Vayner Sports, because, where we met was on the basketball court, and how we continue to bond and grow. And it will always be a part of me as sports, right? And how much it means to me, the competitiveness it brings, the game, and the love for it. I wanted to just talk about, because not many people take their passions and actually make it their life. So I wanted to discuss, like, what does sports mean to you? And what was that transition like when you were, finished with VaynerMedia, and you were just in this little, I think it was about a year, 6 months, where you were trying to figure out, get your health together and figure out, like, what is that next step that I want to take? And how did you decide that Vayner Sports was the route you wanted to take?
Yeah. So sports mean a ton for me. It is both a mental and physical outlet, as well as an entertainment vehicle. And when you think about those three things, those are like three really important things, right? Your physical health, your mental health, and your own enjoyment. Yep. Sports hits all three, right? There's nothing that gives me the peace of mind and the clarity than either being on a basketball court or being on a golf course. Those are the two places. Like, if you talk about your happy place, those are it for me. Because when I'm playing basketball, no matter what's going on in my life, no matter how I'm physically feeling, the stress of the upcoming workday, the stress at home, it all washes away for whatever period of time I'm competing on the basketball court. Right. Same thing on the golf course, right? And so that's big for me, both mentally and physically. And then from an entertainment and enjoyment perspective, I love watching sports. I love playing video games that are around sports. I love playing sports casually. Like, it's just a very important part of my life. And so, to your point, when I left VaynerMedia, I was very fortunate that I had afforded myself financial flexibility, and I didn't have responsibility in my life yet. I didn't have any of these three kids. And so I said to myself, all right, this is a watershed moment in your life. Take a little bit of time and figure out whatever that next step is, and make sure it's a step that is more in line with your passions. And so I took some time off, and what led to Vayner Sports was that while building VaynerMedia, Gary and I also did a lot of investing, both as angel investors and venture capitalists. And so when I left, I had this portfolio of companies that I was, varying levels of involved with, all of them passive, because I was an investor, not an active operator. And I found that a couple of months in, the business that I was most interested in, the one that I was talking to the most, the one I was keeping tabs on the most, was actually a business that I probably had the least amount of upside in. And that was a boutique sports agency. And so Brian McLaughlin and Luke Williams were the two founders of that sports agency. And after about 4 months of taking some time off, I approached those guys and said, hey, I actually want to get more involved. Are you open to the idea of selling your business to me and Gary? And we went ahead and actually bought a majority interest in their agency, rebranded to Vayner Sports, and the rest was history.
Incredible. Shout out to Brian. Right. Wow. It's crazy. I haven't seen him since your house. That was a great time. But I want to touch on the investment piece. And then after that, I have a couple other questions before we close. And when it comes to angel investing, it comes to investing in general, there are people who I've always asked, like, my one question is, what is the number one thing that you look at when you're investing in a business?
The founder or founders.
Right.
And it doesn't,
all about management.
It's all about the people. It's all about their vision. It's all about their ability to execute. It's their ability to pivot when they need to. It's all about handling adversity when they need to. Of course I want to like the idea, and of course I want to like the industry, but what ends up separating me pulling the trigger or not are the people. And the reason I say that is you have to look at, I think there's some great examples. Twitter was a pivot, right? You're talking about a publicly traded massive company that was a pivot.
Right.
And if the operators behind Twitter couldn't understand how to pivot, they wouldn't have gotten to the finish line.
Right.
Slack's another business.
This is my favorite story.
Yeah. Slack started off as a video game company, right? But then the team internally built, because they couldn't find any good tools to kind of manage communications and workflow amongst team members across projects, they basically built Slack to work on the video game company. Video game company wasn't working. They're like, this Slack thing's pretty damn good. Let's make this a business. Another publicly traded $1 billion+ company. And so that's why I think, ideas change. And here's another example, the best example. Pandemic. Now, some businesses failed and it was completely out of their control no matter how good the operator was. So I'm not going to blame somebody for going out of business from the pandemic. But I've seen a lot of businesses that could have and should have failed survive because the operator could handle the adversity. And that's, I think,
Absolutely.
an important piece of it. So that's how I look
Absolutely.
at it.
Actually, my last podcast I had was with Nick Stone, Bluestone Lane, and listening to him and how he broke down what he's been doing during the pandemic and the
Yep.
margins they've lost, but at the same
Yep.
time, how they're still pumping out charity work, how they're still giving money to their employees and taking care of their people. It just says so much about their character, right? And I feel like, to your point, those are the people that are going to succeed and get out of this. Because once you get out of this, I mean, there are so many competitors that are going to lose and go bankrupt that if you survive this, you're already ahead of the game.
Agreed.
And my other question that I want to ask, because this is something personally that I would want to know, is if you're a 25 to 30-year-old right now in the world of media, finance, whatever it is, and you have money to play with, right, and you want to invest, where do you, and again, this is your opinion, no one take these things and go run with it, but from your opinion, where and what would you recommend people investing in today? Because it's so hard, right? Like, I look at the stock market, I'm like, I can make a quick buck. Let's invest in this. And then you look at other businesses. I get hit up by VC funds all the time, young ones, right, with Angel List of the world. And there are always opportunities to put money into something, but you obviously should be smart about it. You have to believe in the project. Where do you find those opportunities? Or is it more just warm network and,
Network's big. Network's big. I would say first and foremost, if you have a chunk of money, diversify that money. And I would have a range of super safe stuff, super risky stuff, and then stuff in between. So I would recommend taking a fraction of that and putting it into things like bonds. Yep. I know that sounds pretty wild, but I believe it. But then also, I think you would want to swing for the fences and try to find an investment that can maybe go to the moon. And that could be, if you want to make a bet that Bitcoin ends up becoming $1 million a coin, that's an option. Or Ethereum or some of the other alternative coins. Yep. If you want to go to platforms like Net Capital is a platform where you can actually go on and find early stage companies that are raising funding, but you don't need to be an accredited investor. You don't need to be you don't have to cut a $10,000 or $25,000 check. You can literally cut a $5 check into a company. There are companies right now that you can invest $5 into. Right. And if they become if they're raising at a $5 million valuation now, and they become $500 million, your $5 just became 500, right? And so there's that option. You can, on Angel List, I think you can invest in syndicates, right? Where you can find somebody who is a prominent venture capitalist, and you could give him or her some of your money. There are SPACs. I don't know if you've heard of what a SPAC is. There's SPACs, right? Like, I'm going to
call you about this because I have a lot of questions about SPACs, especially the one that Gary just started with Matt.
Yeah, there's a lot of going on in that world. And so you can actually buy a piece of a SPAC. When the SPAC first lists, they come out at $10 a share. So you can get into a SPAC if you believe in the leadership of that SPAC. So my number one preach would be diversification and place a bunch of different bets and then and go from there.
Amazing. Yeah, because, I would say the 30-year-olds, 25-year-old, more the 30-year-olds who came up, they saw Facebook start and then blast into what it is today, right? All these social media platforms, we've come up with them, and we're watching people your age, a little older, Gary's age, who've made these successful investments. And, timing is everything in life. My mom's always explained that to me, and I believe in that wholeheartedly. So for us, this next generation, it's like, where do you put that money?
Yeah.
And I know
I got one other I failed to add, and it's one I'm personally partaking in is sports cards too.
Yep. I just spoke to Mike Playa about this the other day.
Yeah, I'm a believer in the intersection of I think sports cards can be the modern day art, especially for a sports fanatic. I'd much rather have a super awesome sports card hanging up on my wall than some random painting of an apple on the lake.
I couldn't agree more. All right, Age. So the last questions I usually ask is you already answered one of them, which is what is your medicine? Which I think people now know why we are so close is golf and basketball. But top three. So I like to play this game where I just ask you your top three, just off the cuff, if you can answer. Yeah. So top three comedians.
Chappelle, Richard Pryor, Chris Rock.
Wow.
Not in any particular order, but those three are in the top three.
Top three sports teams. I know two of them.
Jets, Knicks.
This is the one I was questioning. I'm like, what's the third? Is it just Tiger?
My clients.
There we go. Good answer. Top 3 apps that you use currently.
Top 3 apps. Rome Research, which I recently told you about.
Yep.
TikTok, Reddit.
Reddit. All right. We've come to a close. AJ, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate the time always. Much love. Send my love to Allie, please, and the family. I also want to mention, don't leave out the pup. All right. The pup is still there. We still love the dog. All right. And I know.
still love him, but man, he's a pain in the butt too, man. Like it's. I love Enzo. Enzo, if you're listening, I love you, buddy. But man, I need you to. You know what? I don't blame Enzo. It's my last anecdote. Whoever decided that kids' toys and dog toys should look the same is a cruel, cruel individual. That's his biggest problem. He wants all the kids' stuff. It's
right, and then the kids are miserable. It's like, why? Get this dog away from me.
It's a mess.
I think moral of the story is get the dog after the kids.
I don't know, man.
There's no calculation. Yeah, there's no equation to life. You just got to go and figure it out.
Teach their own.
Much love, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Love you, man.
Thank you. Bye.